Greetings, and welcome back to the MCOC Encyclopedia. Today, we will be covering the matter-transmuting Eternal herself, Sersi, the glancing, regenerating, fury-gaining, and unblockable cosmic terror. We will be breaking down all her abilities and the best ways to defeat her. Sersi's primary mechanics are based around her glancing buff and her transmutation buffs. Let's start with the glancing buff, as this is where her annoyances lie. She gains this whenever you would hit her too hard, or whenever she charges a heavy. It lasts for 10 seconds, but only has a cooldown of 7 seconds. This means that without a good counter, that glancing will be active for longer than not. It's also paused for 4 seconds whenever Sersi throws a special attack, and whilst it is active, all incoming attacks will glance. This means they have a minus 100% ability accuracy, deal 50% less damage, and cannot crit. So without increased ability accuracy, nothing will trigger and you will be dealing significantly less damage. This will make her extremely tanky, and if she's awakened, it gets even worse. But we'll get onto that in a bit. Sersi also gains Transmutation Buffs. She gains one of these when her glancing buff is activated, whenever either champion gains her armor up buff, or is inflicted with a special lock. Additionally, if she ends a combo with a medium attack, she will gain one additional transmutation buff, and if the glancing buff is activated, she will gain another one. These transmutation buffs will reduce the duration of bleeds, shocks, and heal blocks by 30% each, up to a maximum of 90%, and she can have up to 5 permanent ones at once. Any triggered above 5 will only last for 8 seconds. Sersi's special attacks have an interesting mechanic that lets her change what effect they have, depending on whether she is close to or far away from her opponent. Regardless of special attack, if she is far from the opponent and she has at least one transmutation buff, she will go unblockable for 2.75 seconds. Her specials also deal additional damage for each armor up buff on either champion. Her special 1 will grant a true damage buff if launched close to the opponent, and Sersi will consume one transmutation buff to extend this true damage buff if she is able to. If launched far away from her opponent, it will instead trigger a stun debuff for 2 seconds. This can be especially nasty if it catches you off guard, as now you are stunned and she will be able to go in for a big combo. Regardless of distance, the special 1 will also consume one transmutation buff if able, but this time to refresh all Furies and true damage buffs on her. Where did the Furies come from? Well, if her special 2 is a launch close to the opponent, she will gain a 30% Fury, consume all transmutation buffs, and gains an additional matching Fury for each one consumed, up to a maximum of 15 Furies. If launched far away, she will instead regenerate 5% of the damage dealt, and will again consume all transmutation buffs, but this time to regenerate an additional 3% per buff consumed. Regardless of distance, the final hit will deal 30% additional red damage, so if this crits, that's a lot of extra damage. The special 3 will inflict an Incinerate debuff for 12 seconds, and for each transmutation buff consumed throughout the fight, it will inflict an additional one. The Incinerate damage here isn't great, but as always, special 3s are best avoided. Sersi's signature ability will make her even more of a tank. Whilst glancing, Sersi will gain a regeneration buff, healing 5 to 15% of the damage taken, depending on SIG, per permanent transmutation buff on her over 3 seconds. This means that whilst glancing, it will be extremely difficult to get any meaningful damage through. She will also gain 15% of a bar of power, regardless of SIG level, and a short power gain buff whenever a Fury or glancing buff expires or is nullified. I haven't found this to be as major of an issue, and the regen is the real problem here. So what do we need to beat Sersi? Pretty much all of the issues can be traced back to her glancing buff, so let's start there. This is, however, just a buff, so any solid buff counter can work. Doctor Doom, Sorcerer Supreme, Symbiote Supreme, Black Widow Clairvoyant, and so on, using Nullify and Stagger, and Wiccan, Tigra, and Rintra via Neutralize. Keep the glancing buff off her, and you'll be fine. If the glancing buff is activated, do remember that you will now have massively reduced ability accuracy, so your nullify effect may fail. Best to use effects that trigger before she triggers her glancing buff, such as staggers and neutralizes. These are preemptive effects and will remove the buff as soon as it activates. In a few situations though, we can actually use this glancing buff to our advantage, as long as she is awakened. Mojo, for example. If you trigger the glancing buff and then your anti-life field, every time you hit into her, you will trigger that regeneration buff. But if your anti-life field is up, you will almost instantly convert that into a fairly potent degen. If you're running the Mystic Dispersion Mastery, you can get something similar. Trigger the glancing, and then use the quickly expiring regeneration buffs to shoot yourself up to Special 3. I found this particularly effective with Diablo, and then stacking on a whole load of poisons and just letting them melt her. You can then use any future triggering buffs to keep those poisons refreshed, and this will be enough to tick down pretty much any major Sersi in the game. So, Sersi gains a glancing buff if she charges a heavy or is hit too hard. This causes all attacks to glance, causing them to deal reduced damage, they cannot crit, and they have minus 100% ability accuracy. When awakened, glanced hits will cause Sersi to regenerate a proportion of the damage taken. And finally, Sersi's specials have different effects when launched close up and far away, and will most likely be unblockable if launched from far away. Keep the glancing buff off her by standard means, and avoid the special attacks, and you will be fine. I hope this helps you against your future Sersis, and do let me know how your fights are going now. I'm currently working on 6.2.3 to continue the Act 6 run through, and I will put up another poll so you can vote on the next champion that you would like to see. We will be looking at tech defenders this time, so look out for that. I also have a video in the works looking at what happens if we remove the limits from certain champions, just to see how broken they would become. I have a Discord server now, so please go and join that, as it's a great place to pick up bespoke advice depending on wherever you're stuck. Thank you, and I will see you next time.